Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Tax in 10 with me, Rachel de Souza, and Andrew Robbins. We are both tax partners in RSM's London office and have a wealth of experience in dealing with a wide range of private client matters. Your feedback is valuable to us, so do keep it coming, especially if you have thoughts on any topics you would like us to cover. Now, Andrew, I am looking forward to watching the latest episode, or in fact the last episode of Neighbours, which I've recorded. And although I haven't seen it yet, I have seen the trailers of Jason Donovan, and I particularly noticed his mullet haircut, and this was when he was marrying Charlene, if you remember that one.
I'm not admitting to watching it, but I do remember the fact that it happened. And I know, thinking back, the 1980s wasn't exactly a great time for hair, although at least I did have more to cut back then. I'm not quite sure why you're telling me about Jason Donovan's haircut on a tax podcast, though. Unless you're thinking about it as the equivalent of being publicly embarrassed on HMRC's website, naming and shaming tax evaders, perhaps.
For God's sakes, there is no comparison. And in any event, what on earth are you blathering on about?
Well, HMRC have just published their latest update to the official naming and shaming list of tax defaulters. And I'm actually a bit disappointed that you haven't already rushed to the website to check whether any of your clients are appearing on it.
Honestly, no, none of my clients are bad people. And besides, aren't there actually really strict rules that apply to decide who goes on that list anyway?
That is true. And it's actually one of the problems I have with the fact the list exists in the first place. So to stand back a little bit, maybe I should explain what this is actually all about. For a few years now, HMRC have had the power to publish names and addresses of individuals and companies who are so-called tax defaulters, which basically means that they've illegally tried to evade tax of more than £25,000. But on top of that, you only get included in this list if you failed to cooperate with HMRC's investigation.
But doesn't that just mean that however bad your behaviour, you can escape being publicly named just by engaging with HMRC?
Exactly. And I think we can see this when you look at who's actually on the list. Because so far as I can see, the main categories of named offenders are things like builders or takeaway restaurants, which I'm making assumptions here, but it looks to me like there's a lot of cash businesses who may not even think to hire specialist investigation advisors who would be best placed to help them deal with inquiries in a way that don't get them meeting the conditions and being publicly named.
Or maybe you're being a bit generous. Aren't they also more likely to be the type who just doesn't care and is out to cheat the taxman in whatever way they can?
Maybe that's down to the way that you and I differently see the world, Rachel. That I'm clearly a much more generous soul than you are. But
not so sure about that.
I do think it's probably a fair comment, though. It definitely, I think it's the case that if my local chip shop appears on this list, is it really going to stop me going and buying my fish and chips on the way home? Probably not.
So really, then, it's all pretty disappointing. So there's no juicy celebrity gossip about which boy band member has put millions into an income tax loss scheme. It seems to be it's all about publishing names of people who, in my view, probably don't care anyway.
Yeah, which does beg the question as to what the point of the list is in the first place. And again, I think it's worth standing back and saying, well, this thing has been created. There must have been a reason for it. What was behind it? And I think answering that, we could step back and look at the UK tax gap, which is the difference between how much tax was actually paid compared to how much HMRC think should have been paid. Now, this remains steady at 5.1% in 2021. And what that means in English is that the government collected 5% less tax than it should have done, which amounts to roughly £32 billion, which is a lot of money. So part of the original point of creating this naming and shaming was to discourage people from evading tax in the first place. And if the tax gap isn't going down, then maybe that suggests that the measure isn't working.
Of course, it's not quite as simple as that, is it? I mean, the tax gap in 2006 was actually 7.5%. So there has been a big drop in the last, 15 years. And I would say, a big part of that has been because HMRC have been really successful in persuading people to be more conservative in what they do, in tax planning and so on. And again, you will remember, and I remember that 15 years ago, there were lots of tax schemes being sold, all over the place. And these schemes actively sought to reduce people's tax liability in reality, what was an artificial way. Whereas today, that kind of planning just doesn't exist. I know there are still a few out there. And, and I think as a whole, the whole profession, and, we all agree that this is a good move. It's been a good thing that HMRC has done.
Absolutely. I think that's really true. And I think the reduction in that sort of planning is in everybody's benefit, really.
Yeah.
But I'm not really arguing that the naming and shaming list isn't a good idea, or that it couldn't work to encourage better behaviour. I just don't think that it's targeting the right people at the moment. So I know we've talked about this in the past, and we both still see clients from time to time who ask us, how will HMRC ever know I've done this bad thing? And partly again as a result of actions of HMRC. These days we have a much better answer to that. We've got large amounts of information sharing. We've got HMRC systems that are much better at joining the dots and linking things up. But there will always be some people who are basically just willing to play the odds. And if they don't think the penalty for being found out is very high, they're going to take that chance. And I think that if we had a naming and shaming list that carried a big risk of public embarrassment, if you got caught doing the wrong thing, that really could have a much bigger impact on improving behaviour. But we're not there yet.
No. And of course, the obvious answer is we could move to a completely cashless economy. But I think that's a subject for a whole different conversation.
I think so, yes.
Anyway, moving on, do you have a recommendation for us this week?
I do. So, regardless of what you think about his politics, I would say that Barack Obama is still one of the coolest men on the planet. And every year he publishes a summer playlist, which is always really interesting. So this year, the list covers everything from Miles Davis through to Harry Styles. And of course, it also has a song on it by Wet Leg. So I take that as evidence that Barack is a Tax in 10 fan.
Of course he is.
I would really recommend having a look at his playlist. You will find lots of you won't like all of it, but I think there's something in there for everybody, and it's a good way to make yourself look a lot cooler than you or I might possibly otherwise be.
Brilliant. I think I'll take a look at that. Anyway, thank you all for listening. As usual, please do let us have your comments or any feedback. And remember, we can be contacted on rachel.d'Souza@rsmuk.com or andrew.robbins@rsmuk.com. Until next time.
Bye.